I would like, we have three panelists. The topic is Foulkes group analysis and its innovation. So we move forward to the future. What is new in the group analytic society? And the panelists are Kevin Power, Dick Blackwell, and Isaura Neto. And Maurice Nitzen, he is unfortunately in a hospital. And
what happened? What happened?
I don't really know. It's something with the stomach, but it's quite serious, I think. He was moved to intensive care, I think. So he can't be with us, and we hope that he will recover.
But give him all our loves.
We will.
Yes.
And I think we start how it is written down with Kevin. With you didn't tell me how I should introduce you, so you have to introduce yourself. We can't hear you.
Kevin Power, where are you? I don't see you.
You have to look.
Kevin.
You don't remember him, probably.
Sorry? He has disappeared.
Yes, yes.
Kevin Power.
Still, but you are.
People who are not on the panel to mute themselves again.
Okay.
Great.
Now, I haven't prepared anything, but I'd better introduce myself. At least I might know a bit about me.
Okay.
I'm Kevin Power. I practice in Canterbury in Britain. I've been, I think I was on the committee in 1989 for the GAS. And served as secretary for about 6 years. Then the international panel, I think, which both Werner and Louisa were on for a year. And then I stepped down and then came back as treasurer in 03 to 08. And then from 09, well, at one point I was treasurer, I was secretary, and I was organizing the symposium for 2011 in London. But obviously I didn't do all of them all the time. It just felt like it. So that's my involvement with the society. Plus I've been involved with being on the journal committee for, I don't know, since about 04, I think, this century. However, I'm not here to detail just that. I'm not quite certain how to introduce this. Foulkes group analysis and innovation. I've been reading back over a few things that other people have written regarding its innovation. What strikes me is that Northfield was very important, and that's where everything came together, and I think we'd all pretty much agree on that. But it's about the predecessors, actually, to Foulkes himself. I've been very impressed with the Pertegrato's book on Trigant-Barrow and what he was doing in the end of the First World War and through the 1920s and 30s. And although he called at first his group analysis, he later called it phyloanalysis. And so this gave Foulkes the gap in which to take a hold of the name and use it for his particular type of group psychotherapy. But Trigant-Barrow, as the Pertegratos in their book have pointed out, he was very well ahead of his time in many ways. He was thinking rather like Winnicott was and Bowlby quite some years before. And he was thinking about groups and putting people in groups for their benefit long before Foulkes had thought of it or done anything about it. It's also worth thinking about how he was trounced as well by the psychoanalytic establishment of the time. He was robbed intellectually several times over. And it's worth just bearing in mind that our profession and the branches of it can at times be quite ruthless in the way it will take things away from people who have been working hard at a particular idea or ideas. But Trigament-Barrow, I definitely recommend that you read him. I wondered too about one of the remarks that Foulkes talked about with Freud, where Freud spoke of when two strangers meet, they start a psychoanalysis, an informal psychoanalysis of one another. And if that was happening, say, when Freud spoke about this, or wrote about it in the 1910s, I think, it's a certainty that we must be doing this all the time, and we've been doing it forever, whenever two strangers meet, just to see how do they use each other? How are they going to make use of this person, both consciously and unconsciously? And I've myself looked into how literature at times can reflect one or two of these things. For instance, Nathaniel Hawthorne's novel, The Scarlet Letter, which was written, I think, in the 1830s, based in New England, the New England of the 1690s. If you read that through, it's a very interesting novel, by the way, but there is a kind of psychoanalysis that is portrayed where one of the major characters, who has a big secret, goes and talks to the local doctor in an isolated community in New England. And over time, he gradually gets around to the big secret and lets it out. And it's largely because the doctor does not ask him any questions. He just allows him to talk, to let the troubled soul speak, rather than feel that he has to keep this under wraps forever. And of course, he feels a lot better at the end of it, although I can't remember the denouement. However, The Scarlet Letter is worth reading. I think the innovation about group analysis is very largely about the absence of the leader-led ambience. There isn't a leader who's telling you what to do, how you get better. Do this, do that, do the other, which is very much, I think up until the time Foulkes was doing it, was very much how people in a group would be expecting to be led. But again, he was not the first person in the Group Analytic Society to be in groups. This actually was Pat de Mare, because Pat de Mare, in the volume of his shorter papers that was produced after his death, and I think Dick is one of the contributors here, at the very end of that volume is printed about a 10-side paper on how to run groups by Basil Beaumont, I think it is, Teresa. And it was quite obvious that Pat de Mare had been in some kind of therapy groups pre-Second World War in London as part of his own therapy. He'd been in psychoanalysis as well, but he was also involved in groups. And I do wonder about how Pat and Foulkes, while Pat had great admiration for Foulkes, very great admiration, deep admiration for him, nevertheless, I do wonder whether there was something unspoken between Foulkes and de Mare with regard to de Mare's somewhat earlier experience with groups, and how also, just reading freshly something earlier today, de Mare met Foulkes for the first time just before D-Day and the invasion of Europe, June 1944. And it was only very brief, because Pat was then off to go follow the troops behind in Normandy and run exhaustion centers for the army, following up, trying to get them back into action as soon as possible, or else back behind the lines. And I just wonder if there was also a certain tension there, that Pat was off to the war and Foulkes was based at Northfield with the war casualties. Anyway, that's 10 minutes, so I think that's quite enough from me for the time being. I'll hand back to you, Werner, so you can hand it over to Dick.
Thank you, Kevin, for this brief Foulkes history. It's very interesting. And now I would like to introduce to you Dick Blackwell.
Werner, can I just say something? I'm not happy that Isaura gets left waiting till last. Two English males speaking one after another, and a Portuguese woman being left till last. I'm not comfortable with it.
Okay, how do you feel, Isaura, about it? We can't hear you. There's no microphone. There's no microphone, Isaura. Yeah, now you can hear it. It's gone again.
For me, Dick, it's no problem. I don't feel myself excluded, not at all.
Okay.
Are you sure?
Yes.
If you're happy with it, then you at least can have the last word.
Okay. Go on, Dick. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I thought you were going to do that. I spent time writing to you.
Yes, you wrote to me. You are for a long time associate editor of Group Analysis, a founder member of Large Group, founder of IGA Organization Consulting Section, chair of IGA. I don't know for how long, you didn't write that.
3 years.
3 years, and a supporter of the decolonizing group analytic movement. Now, you can start with your contribution, Dick.
Right. Well, I wanted to add something briefly to what Kevin said about Foulkes and what he did. Incidentally, it's Mannheim also used the term group analysis, but he seems to get left out of it. So the term was kind of knocking around as well, as it wasn't just Trigon-Barreau. But I've had conversations with two people who are actually at Northfield with Foulkes. One was Pat de Moray, who said that he described the work as there being a lot of people there who had had horrific experiences and they needed a space to talk about them. And the interpretations of unconscious process, and particularly transference interpretations, would have been entirely inappropriate. And what Foulkes actually did was created a space for people to talk, which is pretty much what Kevin was just describing. The other guy was a psychiatrist called George Day, who was also there, and who said he didn't think that Foulkes, with his thick German accent, was very well understood by a lot of the squaddies there, the soldiers who had their own regional accents that he didn't think Foulkes understood very well either. So he doubted how much they actually understood in any detail what each other was saying, but he thought that what Foulkes conveyed was his concern and his interest, and his readiness to learn from the soldiers in his groups. And that created a kind of atmosphere and a culture that enabled them to speak. And I think those two accounts give a good idea of what is really the essence of group analysis, which is that the creation of that kind of space, rather than any particular theoretical perspective or way of understanding groups. What I tried to put into the list of things that I sent to Werner to introduce me was the innovations that I'd been involved in group analysis. And I think the first was the large group that Pat de Moray set up in the 1970s, that I think came to a significant extent out of the therapeutic community movement, but was very much a new innovation in developing group analytic work. That led to the formation of the large group section of the society, which led in turn to the founding in the 1980s of what was then called the Black and White Group, which was an attempt to bring together black and white people in London to discuss the issues of racism and the division between the black and white populations in London. That got carried on by GASi, who is here with us this evening, so she may contribute something later on about how that developed. I also was thinking about the kind of theoretical developments that there have been in group analysis and the innovations have been, and I think perhaps the first was Maurice Nitzan's conceptualization of the anti-group, which has made an impact both within group analysis and within the whole group psychotherapy movement. That was followed, I guess, by Farad's book on taking the group seriously and the introduction and popularization of Elias, whose work up to, I think, the mid to late 1990s had been largely overlooked. Then there was Farad's follow on from that, his book about race and racism and racialization, which I think remains a kind of classic text within group analysis of how we think about race and racism. I added in something about how I became a Foulkes lecturer, because I was actually given a brief for my Foulkes lecture in 2003. Which was to talk about colonialism and globalization. Now, what's interesting about that is that I wasn't invited to talk about whatever I wanted to talk about. I was given a specific topic. So the management committee in 2002 was particularly preoccupied with and concerned with the issue of colonialism and globalization. And Isaura was my respondent, talking about his experience of colonialism growing up in Nigeria. And it's interesting how that interest has largely been shelved until much more recently. In fact, it's felt as though the interest in colonialism and globalization and its aftermath has lain dormant for much of the last 20 years. Until we come now to the aftermath of Black Lives Matter and the movement to decolonize various curricula and various discourses within academia, that finally we come back to the question of whether group analysis can be decolonized. And I think it was interesting in the previous discussion, the way that European was used as synonymous with international. And I think there's still a powerful element of thinking here that being international means being European. In my view, it doesn't. It means being genuinely international. And I think when we bring in a substantial number of people from the global south, eventually Europeans are going to be the minority within the group analytic community. And a lot hinges on how we as Europeans actually think about that. Other theoretical developments, I think, were the founding of a organizational consultancy section within the IGA, which happened in the late 1980s. That organizational consultancy section has actually folded. It folded after about 10, 15 years, I think, and attempts to resurrect it have failed. But I think the tradition has been carried on with Gerhard Wilke's work, He was a co-author in one of the seminal books on management and leadership called Living Leadership, in which they challenged the idea that was current at the time of the messianic leader who was going to rescue organizations, and suggested that the really effective leadership came from leaders who were able to identify with the dilemmas that their organization was in and share those dilemmas with members of the teams that they were asked to lead, and basically be able to say, well, here we are, we're all in the shit together. Has anybody got any ideas where we go? Which seems to me a continuation of the group analytic legacy of how we take group analysis outside of the consulting room, outside of the therapeutic context, and take it into the organizational setting, and in a sense reproduce some of the elements of the therapeutic community. I think that was taken further with Ralph Stacey, bringing in some of his organizational work and his engagement with complexity theory, and bringing that into group analysis. And Ralph's book is actually about really an application of complexity theory into the clinical setting. Since then, I think the last 2-3 years, I think just before lockdown, there were 2 books again published on work in organizations and the contribution that group analysis can make to those projects. More recently, I think we've had 3 books that are out at the moment. Actually, one is by Sally Scaife, that introduces art therapy in both into the group analytic world and engages with the problems of practicing art therapy, particularly art therapy in groups, in what she and her co-editor describe as the hostile environment of neoliberalism. So it represents an engagement of the problems of practicing group analysis in the current economic and political climate, which I think has been a running problem for the IGA since the beginning of the 1980s, when Thatcherism and Reaganism began to take over the world, and the European context, particularly the European economic community, became increasingly influenced by the neoliberal economic model. And I think that's shaped the way that certainly the Institute of Group Analysis has developed, and the way that group analysis has developed in Europe. There's also been the book by Chris Scanlon and John Adlam about trauma and exclusion, and looking at the what they call the Diogenes paradigm, and how in groups exclude or create outgroups, and the what they call the psychosocial dynamics of exclusion.
Dick,
And there've been 2. You want me to stop?
1 more minute.
1 minute, okay. And there've been 2 other books by Farad about the CBT tsunami and about the problems of political correctness. And also worth mentioning is the project that Teresa has begun on large group dialogue, and a kind of training in large group dialogue, which is a follow-on from Pat Demare's early work that began in the mid-1970s. But I certainly think what Teresa is doing is probably the leading edge in large group work, along with the alternative large group that's been meeting for the last couple of years without a convener or a leader.
Thank you very much, Dick. Now we move on to Isaura. Isaura, she is a long-standing member of the Group Analytic Society, a psychiatrist and group analyst in Portugal, and the current president of the Portuguese Society of Group Analysis. Please start. We can't hear you. Isaura, we can't hear you. No, we can't hear you. Where is your microphone?
Now, I'm
Yeah.
going to share the. Oh, she's done it again.
Sorry, we are not listening.
What happened to your microphone?
She keeps muting herself.
Somebody unmute her.
No,
There she goes.
it's okay.
Yeah?
Yeah. Okay.
Now, yes, we hear you.
So let me share the screen.
Ora pode falar você.
So are you seeing now?
Yes, we can see it.
So to begin with, thank you, Werner and Carla, to having invited me to this such important date. And also to be here with my old friend, Kevin, with whom I worked about 10 years in the management committee, and with Dick, and unfortunately not with Morris. So, well, to begin with, innovating in science requires a deep understanding of the matters one wishes to innovate so that identity can be preserved. So, what are we referring to when we mention group analysis? We have noticed that there are several group settings that, despite their difference, are called group analysis. Is there one or are there several group analyses? It's an old question. What are the main differences, similarities, connections, and boundaries between the several group analysis applications or group analytic-based groups? In order to clarify these situations, we have set 8 kinds of groups, including therapeutic group analysis. We think that those groups have specific common features which may shape a group analytic cluster, a kind of brand, and perhaps a group analytic spectrum. Well, let us see. This reference is from our book, the recent book. So, therapeutic group analysis for Latin American authors is called operative groups in the broader sense. Group analytic psychotherapy, short and long-term, institutional group analytic psychotherapy, ambulatory, day hospital, ward groups, and ward operative groups also. Some of them are innovations. We don't have time to speak of all of them. Multifamily group analysis, parents group, it's an innovation from 2000 in Portugal and based on Badaraco, Argentinian psychiatrist and psychoanalyst who called psychanalysis multifamiliar. 4, mentalization-based treatment group, it's an innovation from Foulkes. Internet groups, asynchronic, it's an innovation. Group analytic coaching, it's also an innovation. Experiential groups, T groups, demo groups, well, some we can, perhaps some are and others are not. Task-centered groups, operative groups in strict sense, supervision, balance groups, teamwork groups. Well, this is the list we made. To further clarify what we have said before, we created 8 tables in order to emphasize the differences and similarities of the group analytic cluster. The first one concerns therapeutic group analysis, followed by the others groups, analytic-based groups. We divided each table into main topics: the objectives of each group framework and their respective group analytic process. This one includes the focus of the process, individual, group, or both, the pattern and the matrix. You may see an empty board where you have the objectives. And if you are not keen in, you not know what I mean by pattern, which is an innovation, also a concept innovation by our Kurzau, who worked and was trained by Foulkes. It's a kind of leadership, activity, dynamic administration. They are correlated. And the matrix you have, well, you may see this in our book if you are, or in the discussion, I can show this slide again. Well, after analyzing the tables, we have noticed that there are some common features among them all. So we may define group analysis in a strict sense, therapeutic group analysis, as well as in a broader sense, a set of psychological group interventions based on the therapeutic group analytic framework. These interventions have 6 common characteristics. First, the importance of unconscious mental processes, both in individuals and in groups. Second, they are handled in groups, taking advantage of the group's relational dynamics. Third, group members are in circles, including the conductor. We consider that even in groups, online groups, we have virtual circles. A non-intrusive conduction. The conductor must understand and maintain the group analytic matrix, being the conveyor of a non-invasive, supportive, and empathic pattern. 5, a holding environment based on a non-intrusive conduction, authenticity, coherence, empathy, confidentiality, punctuality, and constancy, bearing in mind the counter-transference awareness. 6, the opportunity to develop learning and self-knowledge skills. Any of these kinds of groups may be online, keeping the above-mentioned characteristics. This is the experience we'll see we have in Portugal. Keeping their group analytic identity. Online or hybrid setting, having people in presence and online, is the most recent innovation, I think. In 2015, in Portugal, we began to introduce online members in the group sessions, becoming hybrid sessions. Some members attend in person and others online for professional reasons or other. We made a survey, I'll talk of this a little bit later. During the pandemic's restrictions from March 2020 to June 2021, sessions became totally online, either in the private and institutional settings. Made another survey at that time in 2021. Since July 2021, any of these groups may have sessions online and in presence. These may have some members online becoming hybrid. Well, the first survey we did in 2018, the objectives were to understand the main implications for the psychotherapeutic process, namely in terms of communication, attachment, expression of emotions, sexuality, and aggressiveness, when one is in a session that has a hybrid setting. The authors also, Claudia and myself, seek to investigate the implications for counter-transference. The sample and method. The survey 1 sent to 5 group analysts, a very short one, because just few people were working with online members, so there were just 5. And survey sent to 24 participants group members and 21 responses, and with a tax of 87.5%. The second phase of the research after the first COVID lockdown, it was just focused on fully online groups. The objectives were to examine if there are significant differences in the group analytic process between the in-person setting and the online setting. The method and sample, crafting of 2 online surveys using Google Forms sent to 60 group members under treatment and 16 group analysts. Synthesizing from both surveys and my personal experience comparing in-person and online settings. First, there are not significant differences felt by group members and group therapists, neither in the matrix dynamics and communication, nor in the group's therapist's pattern. A slight decrease in the intensity of emotional attachment is referred, as well as less difficulties approaching affection and sexuality. Second, the main differences are related with some consequences of the online setting: difficulty in the assurance of confidentiality, difficulty in reading eye direction, difficulty in looking in the eye. The advantages: maintaining group cohesion. We don't have to leave the group when we go abroad, when we go for vacation, when we go, well, we don't have to change therapist if you don't want to. And the disadvantages: difficulty in looking in the eye, difficulty in reading eye direction, partial visualization of group members, and technological network problems. Hybrid group sessions cause an asymmetric situation into the group matrix, being felt in different ways by group members. For those members who are in presence, being online is often experienced as a privilege. Baby Jesus syndrome, Holy Cradle syndrome, etc. are some of the metaphors used because the chair's disposition changes from a circle to a kind of semicircle in front of the screen. For those members who are online, feelings of not belonging and exclusion tend to dominate. Regarding group sessions with all members online, our experience has been different. In this case, this asymmetry of mixed groups ceases to exist. Online groups with previous group members' awareness are very similar to face-to-face groups. There seems to me that this is not from the survey. This is an intuition. There seems to me that there are individuals, group members, and therapists who are keen on online settings, and others who clearly don't like it for reasons which are not clear enough yet for me. Maria João Centeno last month ran a survey to know how the members of her 5 small therapeutic outpatient groups, institutional groups, would prefer to undertake their group processes. The majority preferred to continue online. The multifamily group analysis has been run online since June 2020 in a psychiatric day hospital for acute patients in Lisbon, with good adherence levels by the part of patients and their families. In the case currently, in my private practice currently, in the case of groups with 3 or 2 sessions per week, half of the sessions are in presence. These may have members attending online becoming hybrid, and half sessions are totally online. In case of groups with 1 session per week, the whole sessions are in person. These may have members attending online becoming hybrid. However, groups members and myself prefer not to be in the hybrid setting. The online working groups are also extremely useful for training purposes. Our society theoretical course has been totally online since 2020 and introduced online therapy in its theoretical seminars. Therefore, I think I may say that online setting has been increasingly accepted by group therapists and patients. It's here to stay, it seems. Theoretical group analytic training may happen exclusively online and should include seminars about online psychotherapy. Conferences perhaps should have both kinds of attendance. Now, 3 questions for discussion, I hope. Is block training still needed? Could we take advantage of the online to globalize training in group analysis? Would it be possible that any member of a national society or institute to organize his or her training in the networks which comprises the several EGATIN organizations? So, to conclude, group analysts with a strong identity, group analytic identity, with a good level of training, are able to innovate and adapt to adverse circumstances and take advantages from them. The online setting does not collude with the group analytic identity in case we have good technological capabilities. The online setting seems to have brought about many potentialities, some of which not yet unveiled. Let us be attentive and not forget further research. You have references. You have Badarac, Maria João, our colleague, Foulkes, Hopper, Lawrenson, myself, Pines, Thornton, Hubert Aucklander, Valbach, Weinberg, and Zimmerman. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Isaura, for this very inspiring report on your research on online groups. And thank you, the other 2 speakers, for this session. Now the discussion is open to everybody. Please raise your hands or